Hello, I'm John Bachman, and joining us now is David Millard, CEO and Director of uranium miner Strathmore Minerals. And David, it's great to have you with us.
Hey, good morning, John. Thanks for having me on.
Well, you said recently that uranium prices could rise as high as $65 a pound in the long term, up from about $52 now. Considering plans to build hundreds of nuclear plants in China, India, and elsewhere, are you sticking with that price forecast, and how can investors get involved?
Well, frankly, the long-term price for uranium right now is something over $60. So it's not a great leap of faith to go up to 65 or even 70. I've seen some forecasters even predicting $80 a pound again. And the basic problem is the nuclear sector, uranium in particular. Uranium mining still does not supply enough new uranium to support the existing nuclear fleet in the world. There's 440 operating nuclear power plants. There's 62 more under construction. The existing fleet consumes 180 million pounds of uranium per year. The existing miners produce about 140 million pounds a year. So there's a shortfall right now before we turn on one more nuclear power plant.
Well, Dallas Federal Reserve President Richard Fisher is reported to have invested in uranium, owning shares in a company called Uranium Participation Corporation. Can uranium serve as a hedge against inflation like gold, or is it a commodity that is more tied to economic growth?
Uranium Participation Corporation actually holds physical uranium. So as the uranium goes up or down, the price of that particular stock will go up and down with that price. They hold physical uranium. But as far as uranium performing like gold or silver or the precious metals, I don't think so. I think it's still becoming a real commodity. And we can get into that a little bit more, but let me answer your question first. I think if the economy slows down in the world, if natural gas prices, of course, in the U.S. have plummeted because of the success of the oil people developing these natural gas reserves across the U.S. So we're now at decade low natural gas prices, around $2.50 per MCF. That's one of the direct competitors with uranium. But uranium's interesting in that I talked about the existing fleet of 440 nuclear power plants. Even if natural gas went a lot cheaper, they're not going to turn off the nuclear power plant to replace it with natural gas, because the big cost of nuclear power is building it. There's a critical date coming up in the uranium market, and it's 2013, and that's when the Russian sales agreement ends. That's where U.S. has literally taken delivery of former Soviet weapons that have been downblended into nuclear fuel, and that nuclear fuel now powers 1 out of 2 nuclear reactors in the U.S. So 104 of our operating nuclear power plants, 52 of them equivalent, are powered by former Russian weapons pointed at the U.S. That's actually a great thing, but that agreement ceases in 2013, and so that fuel is going to have to be made up in the marketplace.
Well, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has approved Southern Company's request to build 2 nuclear reactors in Georgia. What else needs to happen to get the country serious about embracing nuclear energy?
Well, I think for the sake of the country, people have to recognize that nuclear power is the cleanest, greenest, and most cost-effective way to make electricity. And electricity is what brought us up into the high standard of living of what America has. And it actually was cheap electricity that did that. Nuclear is far cheaper than solar, far cheaper than wave energy, far cheaper than geothermal, far cheaper than wind turbines. It just works. It's scalable. It's also dispatchable. And that's what you have to have in a power grid. The renewables that are being touted don't supply that. And so nuclear power is the solution, not only in the U.S. but around the world. The Chinese are so interesting because they have a many millennium history of being one of the most, if not the most prosperous country in the world. It's only the last 100 years that they haven't done real well. Now they're breaking out. Now they're planning their nuclear fleets for the future, and they're looking out 100 years. We need to think a little bit beyond the next quarter, the next 6 months, or the next year in our financials, and look at what will take America to be a great nation 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years from now. And frankly, it's going to be cheap and plentiful nuclear power.
With the activity now in Georgia, do you think other states rather will follow suit with what the Southern Company is doing down there in Georgia? And why is it that this is all taking place, or seems to be taking place, in southern states?
Well, that's where the growth is, and they can see the electrical growth curve. Is that they need to have reliable power for their grids down there. They're generally more conservative states now. They recognize that nuclear power is scalable, dispatchable, and the most cost-effective form of energy out there. And yes, other utilities, especially a number of them in the South, are looking at additional nuclear power plants at their existing nuclear power plants. I don't know of any utility looking at a standalone new nuclear power plant. They're all going to be located at the existing sites pretty much across the U.S. I know the one in Missouri, that company, Union Electric, I believe, is looking at possibly putting another one there. Some down in Florida and South Carolina. They're in Texas. They're all looking at putting additional units. And frankly, the Vogtle unit in eastern Georgia has kind of broken the ice.
David, since you last spoke with us in September, have fears stemming from the events at Japan's Fukushima subsided? And were such fears overblown, or were they understandable?
Well, Fukushima was a disaster because of the tsunami. The earthquake itself killed a number of people. The tsunami killed tens of thousands of people. But with the nuclear accident that occurred, the fact that nuclear accidents are always slow-moving, and so there's time to evacuate people. No one's been killed or even seriously harmed from the nuclear power plants at Fukushima. I mean, even in the chemical explosions that occurred at the plants, there may have been some slight injuries there. But from the radiation effects and things like that, there's really been no significant public harm done to people. Now, is an area contaminated around those 4 breached plants? Absolutely. But the amount that got into the water, that dissipates rather quickly.
Can smaller nuclear reactors supply power and alleviate fears often associated with the traditional twin tower reactors? And what's the appeal here, and are they compatible with the current U.S. power grids?
The nuclear power plants, it's really interesting. The existing nuclear power plants and the 2 new ones announced in Georgia are very large. I think there's 1,600 megawatt power plants. And when you put those, right now we're taking lots of smaller, locally positioned coal-fired plants across the U.S. These are in the 100 to 500 megawatt range. And right now there's some technology being developed called small modular reactors that are, 1/5 or 1/4 the size of the Vogtle plants being considered or being constructed right now. The smaller reactors in the 300 and 400 megawatt range are the perfect size to go into these smaller power plant sites where they're taking small coal-fired plants offline because they're old, because they're inefficient, because they pollute. And the grid, frankly, is perfect for these small modular nuclear reactors. And I think that really is where the future of the U.S. nuclear power grid will go.
Well, how competitive right now are natural gas and coal to nuclear energy?
Well, on a construction plant basis, coal and a nuclear power plant are on the same order of magnitude of construction costs for the size of the plant being considered. Coal, of course, has issues with CO2 emissions. Nuclear power plants, of course, has the issues with the regulatory people and the final waste disposal solution that hasn't been solved because of Yucca Mountain. So the capital costs are about the same. The cost of the coal versus the cost of the uranium is where the difference comes in. The cost of the coal is going to be several times what the cost of the fuel is for the nuclear power plant. For existing coal and existing nuclear is still cheaper by quite a bit once the capital costs are already spent. I understand that coal is probably in the 2 or 3 cent range. The existing operating nuclear are probably well under 2 cents per kilowatt hour. Natural gas is really interesting in that the cost of those plants are far less than either a coal plant or a nuclear plant. the combined turbine natural gas plants that have been installed in quite a few places burn natural gas at a prodigious rate, but the capital costs, again, are going to be 25 or 30% of the cost of a coal or nuclear power plant. But the fuel costs, at $2.50 an MCF, it's actually getting to be competitive with nuclear and coal. But a few years ago, if you remember, gas was $8 and $10 an MCF. That's when it really causes those electrical rates to go up.
Well, what effect do you think a more pronounced recession in Europe will have on uranium prices, and can nuclear energy actually benefit from an economy during times of economic uncertainty?
Another great question. Everyone's heard about Germany wanting to discontinue their nuclear power plants. I think even now as we speak, they're probably reconsidering that because they're looking at the cost to replace all that, and also the reliability of their grid to supply their great industries in Germany. But, the German and European nuclear market is a mature market. It's somewhat like the U.S. It's a mature market in the U.S. The nuclear power plants are already built. They're already consuming uranium. France is 80% nuclear. They're going to continue consuming uranium. The new build, we talked about the 2 in Georgia, but there's actually 62. Now there's 64 under construction around the world. And about half of those are in China. And China has plans for hundreds more. South Korea has 7 under construction right now, and they're planning more. India is planning a lot more. Russia is planning some. Brazil is planning some. The world, especially the developing world, is going nuclear as fast as they can. So the new demand is going to come out of all these new reactors around the world. The existing demand, of which we don't have enough uranium being mined now, is going to stay there. The 104 operating plants in the U.S. are going to continue to operate. The 56 plants in France are going to continue to operate. They might be shutting down 7 or 8 in Germany, but my guess is some of the new build in Russia and maybe some new build in France will make up the shortfall in Germany by supplying nuclear power back to Germany from nuclear power plants based in France or Russia.
Well, I'm going to give you one more chance. We talked about this a little bit, but just tell us a little bit more about Strathmore and your plans for 2012.
Well, Strathmore, again, we have 2 major properties we're working on. One is our Roca Honda project in New Mexico. That'll be a large underground mine. Sumitomo is earning into 40% of that project. That's been in 4 years of permitting right now, and we should have our mine permit in place in mid-2013. Our mill permit a couple of years after that, and should be looking at production in 2016, 2017. In Wyoming, the big new news for Strathmore is signing an agreement with KEPCO. They've agreed to come in and spend as much as $40 million earning into our Gas Hills project. That $40 million is broken down into an $8 million investment in Strathmore stock that we have to spend on the Gas Hills development. And then after the first year, there's a 3-year program to spend another $32 million on development at the Gas Hills. Again, the Gas Hills was one of the leading uranium-producing areas in the U.S. We know it really well. We have people on our staff, engineers, that worked out there for a number of decades. And we're also in the permitting process there for both the mine and the NRC licensed facility. And we look to have the mine permit somewhere in 2013, 2014, the NRC operating license in 2015 or 2016. So again, with weak uranium prices right now, 50 on the spot price, 60 on the long-term price. Short-term prices are weak. Mid-term, when our facilities will come online, that's when we expect prices to start picking back up, and that's the timing that we're shooting for.
All right, David Miller, CEO and Director of Uranium Miner Strathmore Minerals. David, thanks for talking with us.
Hey, thanks a lot, John.